Chapter 1. The Cold Road. The year was 1872, and the Montana sky stretched wide and gray over the northern foothills. The caravan moved slowly across the uneven terrain, a scattered line of wagons groaning under the weight of dreams and dried provisions. Anna Miller sat beside her husband on the hard wooden bench of their wagon, her fingers clenched around the edge of the seat, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains met the sky. They had left behind the ashes of the war, the ruins of a family home in Missouri, and the empty silence of graves freshly covered with dirt. What they carried now was thinner than hope, but heavier than grief. James had been coughing for weeks, a low, rattling sound that seemed to echo in the stillness of the plains. His shoulders slumped lower each day, his skin paler beneath the brim of his hat. When he stopped eating, Anna began counting his breaths. On the 58th day, when the caravan stopped at a clearing near a crooked well, he didn't move from his bedroll. His breath came slower. The others spoke in hushed tones nearby, their faces turned away. She sat beside him through the night, holding his hand as the wind whispered through the pine trees. Just before dawn, his hand went still. By morning, James was cold. His body lay wrapped in a wool blanket at the edge of the trees, a few stones marking the place where he had fallen asleep and never woken. The caravan couldn't wait. Time and weather were pressing harder than morning. A woman with a kind face gave Anna a jar of preserves and a soft warning not to stay long. A boy helped her lash a small bundle of supplies to the side of her wagon. Someone left her a single-shot rifle with an Asian. Anna stood alone with the wagon and the terrible stillness that follows the end of everything. The wind picked up as the sun rose, pulling strands of her hair loose from the braid that hung over her shoulder. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. Instead, climbed onto the bench, took the reins with unsteady hands, and turned the mare south, toward the fort, toward something unnamed. The trail narrowed quickly, swallowed by the press of tall pines and crooked rocks. Snow clung to the shadowed places, even in early spring, and the ground was soft from melting ice. Her wagon shuddered with every rush. Inside, a rusted iron rested in her satchel, along with the rag and bier, an extra of wiles, and wife. Every creak of the wagon, every breath of the mare, every snap of a twig under the wheel sounded louder in the silence. She moved slowly, not out of caution, but because she had nowhere to rush to. She had lost her map with James, and her direction now was less about geography and more about momentum. At night, she built fires with shaking hands, the sparks catching slowly in the damp wood. She ate cold biscuits and drank melted snow. Her bed was the ground beside the wheel, her pillow a folded coat. She stared at the stars until sleep took her. In the dark, she felt the space where it had been, a presence turned into an absence so sharp it hurt more than the cold. By the fourth day alone, the trail forked at the base of a hill, and she chose the path that smelled of pine and promise. The horse stumbled once but kept moving. Anna sat stiff-backed, a shadow of the woman who had started this, yet not broken and narrow. Not yet. The road ahead twisted through wilderness and memory, and though her hands trembled, she held the reins tighter, because now there was only forward. Chapter 2. Stranger in the Snow. The third day brought the storm. It came suddenly and without mercy, rolling over the mountains in thick white waves, swallowing the sky and earth in a curtain of snow. The wind howled through the pines, sharp as broken glass, and the world narrowed to a blur of white and gray. Anna's horse faltered beneath the growing drifts, and she was forced to leave the trail entirely, leading the animal by its reins toward a narrow cleft between two boulders. The space was just wide enough to shield them from the worst of the wind. She gathered pine branches and built a shallow barrier, spreading her blanket across the rock wall behind her. Her breath rose in clouds, her fingers stung with cold, and her thoughts moved slowly, dulled by exhaustion and the relentless storm. As she gathered snow to melt over her small fire, a sound broke through the wind, a ragged, wet gasp, not far off. At first, she thought it was the storm playing tricks on her, but then it came again, a human voice, weak and broken. She moved toward the sound, one hand gripping the other steadying herself against the rocks. The snow had drifted deep, but the cry led her down a slope, half covered in spruce needles. There, near the base of a fallen tree, she found him. A man slumped on his side, half buried in snow. One leg twisted unnaturally, caught in a rusted iron trap. Blood had frozen around the wound, and his face was pain even in unconsciousness. Skin was olive-toned, his jaw rough with stubble, and a torn blanket clung to his shoulders like the last fragile remnant of warmth. Anna hesitated only a moment, then dropped the rifle and knelt beside him. Her fingers worked clumsily to pry the trap open. The metal bit into her palms, the cold burning more than heat ever could. When it finally gave, the man's body sagged and she caught him under the arms, dragging him slowly, inch by inch, back toward the cleft in the rocks. It took the better part of an hour. Her back ached, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. She laid him on the ground near the fire, wrapped his leg in strips torn from her own underskirt, and covered him with every piece of fabric. His breathing was shut steady. His lips moved once in a language she didn't recognize, and then he went still. He didn't wake that night. Snow pressed against the entrance to their shelter, muting the world beyond to a hush. Anna melted water, fed the fire, checked the bandage. She didn't sleep. She watched his face, waiting for the breath to falter. But it didn't. When he stirred the next morning, it was with a wince and a sharp intake of air. His eyes opened, dark, alert, and ware. Harry. Handsome area, exciting and striking. There is a native from Taro, Kiwo, Professor Tascal. Men, bang, traxingly. Then he spoke. His voice was rough, the words slow and accented, but clear. His name was Thomas Gray. He said little else. Just that he had been hunting, caught off guard by the storm. He didn't explain the trap or the reason he was alone. She didn't ask. Instead, she offered him a strip of dried meat and a tin cup of hot water. They shared the small space in silence, the fire crackling between them. His face remained impassive, but she saw the lines of pain in the way he moved, the way his jaw tightened with every shift. Still, he stayed upright, alert. She admired that, but nothing. At night, they huddled near the embers, each wrapped in layers of cloth, each listening to the wind tear at the mountains above. The storm had no interest in mercy, but inside the narrow cleft, it could not touch them. Anna watched him from time to time. His hands were calloused to matrix with comfortable on way on topics. His hands were calloused to the Maricoster, and he spoke in their crom. And Orion, recognition, maybe. Not of who she was, but of what she had done. He didn't thank her. She didn't expect him to. The fire between them was enough for now. Words were unnecessary. She had pulled him from the snow. He had stayed alive because she had chosen not to walk away. And in that strange, frozen place, without names or stories, that was all that mattered. Chapter 3. Ice and Fire. The snow finally stopped after 7 long days, leaving the mountains hushed under a heavy white silence. The storm had torn through the pass with brute force, burying trails and freezing the small streams solid. The world looked still, beautiful in its cruelty. But beneath that stillness, life had to continue. Thomas was able to sit up by then, winced with every movement. He used a branch as a makeshift cane, testing his weight slowly, limping along the edge of the camp to keep his muscles from stiffening too much. Anna managed most of the work now. She rose early, pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders, and moved through the snow with quiet resolve. Her steps left delicate prints along the trees where she collected kindling and checked the snare lines they had set together. The fire became her second task each day. She cleaned the ashes, rebuilt the base, and carefully struck the flint until a spark caught. Sometimes Thomas watched her from his bedroll, his eyes following her movements like one might watch a river. Steady, necessary, without question. At dusk, she gutted the small rabbit they had caught, boiled the bones for broth, and used the remaining meat sparingly. The stew was thin, but hot, and it was enough to keep them going. Thomas had taken to sharpening her knife when she returned. His hands, though damaged, were still steady. He used a flat stone, grinding in small, methodical motions, never speaking, but always making sure it was sharp by the time she returned from the trees. That evening, the wind softened. The branches no longer groaned with weight, and the fire cracked peacefully beneath the overhang of rock. And the answer. The remaining digit curled around the cup as best it could, and he met her eyes, watching for her reaction. She gave none. She held the cup a moment longer to then let it go gently. His eyes lingered on her face, searching, and then, for the first time since she had found him bleeding in the snow, he smiled. It wasn't wide, not bold, but real, quiet, and certain. That night they lay close to the fire, not touching, not yet, but closer than before. The silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like understanding. When Anna woke the next morning, there was frost on the edge of her shawl and a small bundle tucked beside her rucksack. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a small wooden carving, rough, imperfect, but unmistakable. A fox is it again. How? I said. Twy? It had been carved by someone who had watched, remembered, and offered something quietly personal. She didn't ask about it. She didn't need to. When she stepped out into the snow to check the traps, she looked over her shoulder first to see if he was watching. He was. And when their eyes met, neither looked away. Chapter 4. Test of Strength. As the ice began to retreat and the snow melted into slush along the narrow mountain paths, signs of life returned to the forest. Tracks appeared in the mud. First the wide splayed prints of elk, then smaller, sharper imp bore the unmistakable shape of human boots. Thomas grew watchful. He studied the ground with quiet intensity, crouching by each set of tracks and tracing their direction with tip. When he stood, his face was grim. He explained in a few clipped words that some men, deserters from the war, had taken to hiding in these mountains. Men without sides, without rules, surviving on theft and fear. Anna cleaned the old rifle she had carried since leaving the caravan. The barrel was worn but functional. She checked the powder, packed it carefully, and loaded a single shot. She tied her hair back and moved with quiet precision, aware now of how much had changed in her. That night, the sky was cloudless, the stars bright, the cold returning in sharp gusts that whispered through the pine. The fire was steady, their small camp tucked in a low hollow between trees. They had said little, conserving energy and alertness, their movements deliberate. The silence of the forest felt heavier than usual. Then came the sound. A branch cracking, slow footsteps, the rhythm of boots against frozen ground. Thomas sat up first, already holding the knife he kept by his bedroll. Anna rose behind him, lifting the rifle and stepping into the light of the fire, her hands steady despite the tightening in her chest. 3 men emerged from the dark. The firelight revealed them one at a time. The first held a rifle, slung casually across his shoulder. His coat was patched, eyes sunken. The second bore a long scar across his cheek, the skin there pink and raw like an old burn. The third said nothing, but carried a woodcutter action. They had said despite the tightening in her chest. 3 men in the plan and her mind, their movements deliberate. The silence of the forest felt heavier than usual. Then came the sound, a branch cracking, slow footsteps, the rhythm of boots against frozen ground. Thomas sat up first, already holding the knife he kept by his bedroll. Anna rose behind him, lifting the rifle and stepping into the light of the fire, her hands steady despite the tightening in her chest. 3 men emerged from the dark. The firelight revealed them one at a time. The first held a rifle, slung casually across his shoulder. His coat was patched, eyes sunken. The second in her chest. 3 men emerged from the dark. They laughed as they approached, the sound low and dry. Their words came with false ease, the tone of men who no longer feared consequence. They spoke of freedom, of the wild, of the absence of law in these hills. They said it didn't matter who owned what. The mountains belonged to those strong enough to hold them. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and the fire. His stance was relaxed but firm, a quiet warning. Behind him, Anna raised the rifle and leveled it without shaking. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. One of the men, the one with the burn, took a step closer. His smirk widened. Anna exhaled, adjusted her grip, and fired. The shot hit the earth a foot from his boot. Dirt sprayed upward. The sound low and dry. Their words came with false ease, the tone of men who no longer feared consequence. They spoke of freedom, of the wild, of the absence of law in these hills. They said it didn't matter who owned what. The mountains belonged to those strong enough to hold them. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and the fire. His stance was relaxed in the tongue. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and the fire. His stance was relaxed, but firm, a quiet warning. Behind him, Anna raised the rifle and leveled it without shaking. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. One of the men, no threats, no shouts, only silence behind them. But the air still carried their promise. After they were gone, Thomas sat near the fire for a long time. His shoulders were taut, eyes fixed on the flames. Anna didn't speak. She took the spare blanket from the pack and placed it gently over his shoulders. Her hand lingered there, light but present. He didn't move away. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough but quiet. He said she was no longer just a woman who had survived winter. She had become a wall, a barrier between danger and the life they were trying to rebuild. And she believed him. Tanswin. That she come unto the Tan.
Chapter 5. The River Between Them. The snow melted slowly that year, revealing the bare earth like a wound healing under the touch of spring. Streams swollen with meltwater threaded through the valleys, carving new paths where ice once ruled. Anna and Thomas broke camp in the soft light of morning and descended from the foothills onto the open plains. The land stretched out before them, wide and golden brown, dotted with stubborn patches of snow and the dark outlines of brush. Thomas moved with a surer step now. The injury in his leg mended enough to walk without aid. He spoke little, but his eyes were alert, scanning the distance for signs of shelter, of movement, of danger. He led them eastward toward an old stagecoach station he remembered from before the war, half a day's ride if the land was kind. He believed it might still hold forgotten tools, perhaps salt, maybe a canister of kerosene. It was direction, a hope, and then chat.
They followed a dry creek bed, the ground soft and uneven. It was Anna who saw her first, a small shape crouched beneath the brittle shade of a dead cottonwood tree. She stopped, hand raised. Thomas followed her gaze. The child was no more than 6. A girl. Her dress was torn, her cheeks streaked with dirt. One sleeve was stained with dried blood, and her eyes were wide with fear but not surprise, as if she'd already accepted too much for her age. Anna approached first. She crouched low and whispered soft, wordless sounds. The girl didn't run. She let herself be held. Her skin was cold against Anna's arms. Her voice, when it came, was faint. Her mother had died 2 days earlier in a fire that swept through a camp upriver. She had wandered since, hungry, alone. Anna lifted her onto the horse and wrapped her in her shawl. Thomas said nothing. He took the spare wool cloak from his pack, one he rarely used, and tucked it around the girl's sides. For the rest of the day, she rode between them, her tiny hands clutching the reins, her silence a shadow neither of them tried to. By dusk they reached the station. It stood against the sky like a forgotten relic, sun-bleached and listing, but still whole. Thomas checked the perimeter, then pried open the heavy door with a grunt. Inside, there were shelves, empty but unbroken, a rusted lantern, a barrel of water, half frozen, a few iron nails in a jar, hope in fragments. They set up camp beside the structure. Thomas worked to patch the roof, hammering boards into place, while Anna unpacked what remained of their supplies. The girl, too young to speak of, sat by the fire and watched them both with wide, hollow eyes. That Anna brushed out the child's tangled hair with slow, careful strokes. The girl leaned into her without words. How comes? He looked over once, just once, and in that glance was everything that hadn't been said. They were no longer only 2 survivors of separate pasts. Now there were 3. And in the quiet that settled over the sun, under the cold stars and the steady rhythm of fire, a subtle line was crossed. Not spoken, not confirmed, but understood. They were no longer just traveling companions. They were becoming a beginning. Chapter 6. The Land That Remained. By midsummer, the winds that once screamed down from the mountains had softened. The days were long and amber gold, thick with the scent of sun-warmed earth and the hum of bees. On a gentle rise near the old station, they built a house. Not large, not grand, but theirs. The walls were made of pine and sweat. The windows faced south to catch the sun, and the door creaked with a sound that already felt familiar. The roof was low and sloped, sturdy against the wind. Inside, the floors were swept clean, the hearth already stained from early fires. Thomas carved a small wooden sign by hand. The letters were uneven, but clear. Miller Gray. He nailed it above the door and stepped back to look at it, eyes narrowing not with doubt, but with care. Anna stood beside him, her hands dusty from planting lavender beneath the windowsill. She didn't say any air. She didn't need to. The child, who now laughed easily and slept soundly, ran barefoot in the dirt, her dress flaring behind her like a small banner. She called them by name, without hesitation, without formality, her voice a thread stitching them all together. She had no surname left, no family but this one, and she seemed to accept that with the calm only children understand. The days passed in rhythm. Thomas hunted, repaired the fence, shaped rough furniture from split logs. Anna baked, laundered, read aloud at twilight. In the evenings they sat together on the porch, not speaking often, but listening to the cicadas, to the creak of wood, to the breath of a world that had not broken them. One evening, as the sun bled across the plains in streaks of orange and red, Thomas approached quietly. His shirt was open at the throat, sleeves rolled to the elbows. "Myselman around the Parsazanium. The Sikatiman's back than if with the Roman. Te, myself, a crane, and come plain. Grown there, Astru nations without formality. Haralde, I say, and slept soundly, ran barefoot in the dirt, her dress flaring behind her like a small banner. She called them by name, without hesitation, without formality, her voice a thread stitching them all together. She had no surname left, no family but this one, and she seemed to accept that with the calm grace only children understand. Anna took it without ceremony. Her fingers brushed his, and she slipped it onto her hand. It fit, not perfectly, but honestly. She looked at him and said that she no longer feared winter. Thomas looked at her, his face softened by shadow and light, and said that now winter lived inside him no longer. They stood together on the porch as the sky dimmed and the grasses whispered around their boots. Behind them was the house, warm and lit. In front of them, the land stretched far and quiet, not empty, but open. There were no crowds, no witnesses, no applause. Only two could walk through fire and frost, sorrow and silence, and come out the other side not just alive, but whole not. There were no vows spoken aloud, but there was a promise, steady as the earth beneath them. This was not a story about conquering the land. It was a story about conquering loneliness,